So in this video, I'll try to demonstrate point patterns, and that'll include index point, pierce point, and rosette point. These are relatively simple and easy to visualize. I will start with index point. So I have set up here my usual 2-inch dowel with a 1/4 inch wall thickness, and presently I have a fly cutter mounted in here. It's round. It could be a 60-degree point, but I'll stick with round for now, just for a change. And index point, once again, you drag to the axis, and because of the orientation here, I'll drag it down a little bit. You can see in the visuals window that I'll get a simple pattern like that. I could change this. I'll left click that and drag it off. I'll change this to a drill frame, and this will be a 1/4 inch drill. I could drag that index point there, drag it down a little bit, and I want that at 90 degrees. And that will give me going in the correct direction, so that'll give me a depth of 0.25 inches, or 1/4 of an inch, and you can see that showing in there. These can be easily changed. If I wanted 16 of those going around that little 2-inch thing, then I could get that. To duplicate what's already on there, just double click over the first one and drag it down. Drag down number 1, drag down number 2, and you can have a pattern like that. The second row of dots, you can offset that with phase, for example, 180 degrees, and you get kind of a polka dot pattern. And you can do the same, obviously, by changing the orientation of the cutter. If I go back to a universal cutting frame this time and drag index point on there, I get those again. I can try to change this to 0. Click on that. Orient those to 90 degrees, and then I get a more oval going horizontally rather than vertically. And once again, those could be, maybe I only want about 12 on this one. I can double click on the first one there, push it up, drag that one down, offset that by changing the phase, which is right now 0. I can go 180 again, or I can duplicate that, drag that down, and orient that third one to, say, let's say 120, and go up to the second one, and with that, say 120. So you get kind of an overlapping pattern. This is additive, so this one has to be 240, and that'll take it over. And that can make an attractive pattern on the outside of a piece as well. It's worth just playing around with these. The other thing to note is the spacing of these cuts. So you'll see the X location, and that'll be at 1.5, and the Z location 1.62, but you can change those Say I wanted that at 1.8, and you see the 0.1 changed up there to nearly the top of it. And that's the easiest way to get these evenly spaced, is just to go through and change the XZ coordinates as you need them. So I'll end that there. Mostly that one just needs to be played with so you understand the kind of patterns that you're going to get. Here's an example of using index point on the thimble for my dome chuck. So in the second example, I will show you pierce point. And with this one, ordinarily I would use a drill, but you could try it with a fly cutter if you wanted. This one will be 0.25 inches, a quarter of an inch, and I'll leave this as round. And we'll see what pierce point does here. So I'll drag it to the axis, and you can see it's oriented in a curve leading into the wood. So the depth I have to set, cut depth probably 0.25 inches again. Put the lines on, render that. Now this one went to move Z, and we don't want that. We want move curve. Let's see if we can get that to render, and that'll just kind of cut it all the way around, which is an effect that you can use, but that might be a line you cut, say with a small drill or fly cutter or end mill, to go all the way around something. And once again, you can put in more than one if you want. Drag it down and see what happens when you render it, but it'll give you the same kind of groove going all the way around. I don't use pierce point all that much, but that's how to play with that one. So I've used pierce point to cut the groove on my thimble I use in my dome chuck. The Looms provides an example of pierce point in his program. Pierce point looks like that. In this case, it's on the top of a box. I'll render that, turn the lines off, and you can see that's using a flat cutter, in other words, an end mill in a drill frame. And you can see the closely spaced points that are being demonstrated there. I'll turn the grid off so you can see. So that's another use for pierce point that you can use to decorate the top of a box, for example. The third example I'll do is rosette point. So this one, once again, I have a 2-inch diameter dowel with a wall thickness of 0.25 inches, and I'll be using a cutter frame, so we get the axis for the cutter frame, and I'll drag a rosette point onto there. And this doesn't give too much of a cut because the depth isn't very deep yet. This is a sine cut. So let's look at the depth. It's only 0.05, so let's go 0.1 inch and render that. And we get some nice big circles that way. And once again, you could double click on that and drag it down, render it, and that kind of a big polka dot pattern, you'd probably want to phase that 180 degrees or something like that. Just depends how much of a phase you wanted. Of course, you don't have to have a sine pattern here. I'll get rid of that second one just by clicking it and dragging it off. It's more interesting if you go to, say, a lotus pattern. I'll turn off the render, turn it back on, so you get a more interesting hole cut there, and you see it follows the lotus pattern around the edge like that. So that can give quite an attractive decoration as well. What I primarily use rosette point for is, I'm going to clear everything there, and I'm going to make a, say, a 4-inch curve like that, so we can look at the top. And I'll drag rosette point onto here. And I want that to cut maybe a little bit deeper. Depth is on the first one here, so that's the default 0.05, so let's go 0.075. That'll give us a little bit more depth. I'll put another one out here like that, and it'll render that. It's getting kind of wishy-washy like that. So when it gets like that, then sometimes you have to play with the amplitude a little bit more. The amplitude is quite low. Let's go 0.2 just for fun. And that makes it a little bit more defined. Perhaps you would rather that was not a sign pattern, but a Tudor rose pattern. So this is working much more like a rose engine. Now that's Tudor 8 right now. I'm going to change that to Tudor 5 because that looks much better. And I'll do the same for the first one. Tudor 5. And that, if you render it, gives a nice pattern. I'll turn the lines off so you can see. But sometimes it's better to offset that, phase it 180 degrees. There's phase right there. And sometimes it cuts a little nicer. And I've shown on other videos cutting Tudor rose patterns. Now this central thing, maybe you don't want to have that bump there. So you can see the extent of the cuts here in the cut point screen. If you drag that over so that the cut goes right to the center, you can just take it to a single point. You can drag that one a little bit closer maybe to overlap it. Turn the lines off so you can see, and that's okay as a pattern. Maybe you like that, maybe you don't, but it's a start. So playing with Tudor rose is fun. Obviously in this program you've got access to all the Holtz patterns as well. A heart pattern is a classic. I will change this one to heart as well. You can blend different patterns and see if you like those. And they render quite quickly. So that's more a classic rose engine type manipulation that you could do on the end of a box. And if you're using a fly cutter, let's change this to a 60-degree point, which is what I usually use. Sometimes it'll let you change this after. If you've got all the lines, you usually get a more crisp pattern if you use a 60-degree cutter than a round cutter as I had there. See, these edges are a lot more crisp in this particular one. And that'll be reproduced in the wood. Turn the lines off. A popular one is the lotus pattern. I always like that one. Change that from heart to lotus. This program makes it so easy to explore different patterns that it makes this all just a lot of fun. Lotus 5, maybe you need Lotus 6. Put that in there. Change that Lotus 5 to Lotus 6. So you don't have to figure it out on the workpiece. You can figure it out within the program. There's the lines back again so you can see what it's supposed to look like. So that's rosette point and more classic rose engine type patterns that you could do on the end of a box or the bottom of a box or inside a box if you have the right equipment. Well, that's the end of the video. I hope it has been helpful for you. Thank you for watching.